Good evening, buonasera. And welcome to the next installment of Adventures in Italian Opera. I call it Adventures in Italian Opera Plus by now, because you know I go off to France and Germany and Austria and Spain and perhaps Argentina, all these different places we cover the part of music. But opera, as you know, was born in Italy. And our guest tonight is one of the greats, Isabel Leonard, mezzo-soprano, who I've been eager to talk to for a long time, but she's one of the most in-demand artists that we have, and so I'm very glad you're here. Stefano Albertini sends greetings. He's in Italy, and he will be back, of course, but he's in Italy, and therefore, you know me by now, you know how this works. Let's begin. So, Isabel is appearing right now in Il Barbiere di Siviglia. Thank you. That's good. As Rosina. She sang last night. She was wonderful. And Julian, please set up number 2. And by the way, she appears here tonight through the courtesy of the Metropolitan Opera, whom we thank. But I think before we talk about the Met, I'm going to talk about a theater a little further south from the Met, Carnegie Hall. Many of you, when you go to Carnegie Hall, I know all of you shut off your phones, but you hear an announcement. How many of you have actually listened to and heard the announcement? Who do you hear often? Isabel Leonard is so much a part of our firmament in the arts in New York that there are 4 artists that they use that I've heard. There is Isabel Leonard, Renee Fleming, Yo-Yo Ma, and James Taylor. So, Isabel, would you like to admonish them to turn off their phone?
I'm not even sure I remember it. I did it so long ago. But it was something like, "Hi, ladies and gentlemen, this is Isabel Leonard. Please turn off your phones."
And enjoy the performance. Now, those of you who know and love Carnegie Hall as I do, know that every year they do a lot of thematic programming, and they engage certain very important artists to do what are called perspectives, where they have the artist come, work with Carnegie Hall, name colleagues they might like to work with, name music that they're interested in doing, perhaps music that they're not known for. And Carnegie Hall, with great glamour, announces basically every February who the prospective artists are in the coming season. When I invited Isabel here almost a year ago, I had no idea that this was happening. So you can imagine how happy I was when I was at Carnegie Hall that morning in February, and they handed out this with information on both sides, Perspectives, Isabel Leonard. And Isabel, how did this happen? And talk about how you evolved the perspectives that you're going to be doing.
Well, first of all, hi. It's nice to see you. Well, it happens basically like everything else happens in the business. You're lucky to be asked, and somebody comes to you from the company and says, "We'd like you to be a prospective artist at some point or another." And then the discussions continue as to what season is probably the best season to do it. It depends on what else you're doing that season, where you are, do you have the time? The perspective series take up quite a lot of your time because there are multiple performances at Carnegie and in different venues within Carnegie and sometimes outside of Carnegie. So you do have to sort of look quite in advance before you say yes, because you need the time to say yes to. And that's really sort of how it happens. Mm-hmm. Programming is still kind of underway. I have some ideas of things that are happening, obviously, but nothing is quite fully set. Well, one of the concerts I think is set in stone, but the rest are in the works.
So what I'm going to do is, because people watch this video and people are watching the streaming tonight, I'm just going to name the dates that for right now are set so that you will block your calendars for January 15th, 2026, February 4th, May 5th, and June 9th. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Oh, they're all in 26.
They're all in 26, so you have time.
Thanks for letting me know.
Now,
Can I take that home?
yeah.
Okay, good.
But you are being modest, Isabel, when you say that, you know, if you're lucky, they come to you. I'm going to quote one of my patron saints, Saint Aretha of Franklin, who, when they asked her what talent is, she said, it means you've got something going on. And you do. And, you know, in thinking about this conversation, I fastened on something, and I'm curious what you think. I didn't talk to you about this before. There's an artist who I knew and worked with, who I think of having many of your same characteristics. And I hope you take this as a compliment. I mean it as a compliment. Roberta Peters. Did you ever meet her?
I did not.
Okay. So, like Isabel, Roberta Peters was New York born. Talent presented early, but she did not simply coast on the talent and the physical beauty and the charm and all of that that Roberta Peters had at a very young age, and Isabel at a very young age also demonstrated. She continued to grow and work as an artist, and she, throughout her career, which was a very long career because she took good care of her voice and of her body, one thing to know about her is she did Pilates with Joseph Pilates, the man who invented Pilates. Roberta Peters did that. And Julian, I'm going to skip from number 2, and I think we're going to actually start with number 4, okay? Because I found a video
Oh, God.
that you did in London. Do you know the one I mean?
Uh-huh.
Is that okay to
Yeah,
play
it's
it?
totally fine. I don't know what I said. I feel like we always reserve the right to amend the things that we say, don't we, right? I think that's
Well, then you
generally a
can-
good rule.
Then you could do that. But what struck me was, in watching this, I thought I was conversing with Roberta Peters 35 years ago, because it was a similar seriousness of presentation, care about the work, practicality, not simply coasting on your gifts, very simply, but doing the work, not cutting corners in any way. So let's watch this video. I think we can see without having to move, but if we want to move, we can.
Breathing. You would think that something so simple that we do every day to live would be simple for singing. And yet somehow it turns into this elusive conversation about what is support and how do I find my support. And I don't think I have enough support. The way I think about support is I think about support coming into my lower back. Strange idea, I know, since our lungs do not go to our lower back. But it's a concept that in the inhale, the air comes in easily to the body, and then it doesn't get held into the body. It comes in, and then in the act of singing, it just naturally comes out. If you think about the way you speak, we inhale in order to speak. We don't think about, and then we start speaking on this long breath of air, and we think about how we're going to speak and blah, blah, blah. We take actually organically and innately the amount of air that we need to say the phrase that we're intending to say. And I think so much of that translates into singing, actually. It's just that sometimes we forget how much of an organic thing it is. One exercise I like to do for breathing is I like to count. And I'll keep any sort of a rhythm that I like, and I'll count to maybe 12, and I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then I'll inhale for about a count of 4. And then I'll do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that I go through that, and I vary, as you can tell, not only maybe dynamic, but the pitch as well. Again, all those variations that keep you vocally healthy and malleable. And then the next time I inhale on a count of 3. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then I inhale on a count of 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I inhale on a count of 1. And then on the last one, I do what I would call a catch breath. So I'll say 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you'll realize that you can actually still do it, even though you've taken what you think is a lot less air
than a count of 4 breath. And it helps to remind your brain that you don't need to tank up every time you're getting ready to sing, which I think is extremely healthy to have these different things in your wheelhouse. So what happens if you are in an opera or in a concert or wearing very uncomfortable high heel shoes and you need to sing? And you are in a funny position, or you're lying on the floor, or your colleague is squeezing you within an inch of your life. In this case, I always think about instruments. Now, of course, yes, you take a clarinet out of its case and it's a fixed instrument, right? But you're not going to twist and mold the clarinet and expect it to make the same sound. It won't. So as a singer, you think, okay, that's going to be a little bit like me. I like to think about my shoulders and my chest and my abdomen and all these things being able to stand up tall and sort of float as if my shoulders were a hanger. And everything underneath gets to float rather in a relaxed way. I like to think of my abdomen and my legs and my hips and all the way down to my feet as being quite strong into the ground, as being the pillar in which the rest of the instrument can sort of float above. As much as I like to say this would be a posture that I would like to create for myself at all times when I sing, that's also not always possible. You have to move on stage, you have to interact with your colleagues, sometimes you're lying down on the ground. So then for me, it always boils down to the ultimate thing, which is your core, which is where your breathing comes from, your strength comes from, and actually your entire body's strength comes from the strength of your core. And now, I can speak specifically to this because after having a baby, your core sort of shot, sort of gone. So you have to find it again and retrain it again and exercise and do things. Sometimes teachers will tell you, don't do sit-ups, don't do crunches as a singer because it will affect your voice, it'll affect your throat. Well, if you do incorrectly, yes, any exercise done incorrectly will injure some other part of your body, if not the body part you're trying to exercise. You don't want to crunch your neck when you're doing crunches or sit-ups. You don't want to engage these neck muscles at all. It's about your core muscles. So doing any core exercises for me is actually a key thing as a part of my warm-up. I like to do planks. So, like wall planks. If you put your hands, you could start by putting them on a wall, kick your feet out a little bit so you're at an angle. You can get a little more fancy and get to a chair. You can get even more fancy and get to the floor. Those are really fun. I quite like to do those. Sometimes I get a low bench and I'll put my hands there and I'll do what I call airplanes. So I put one arm out and then I bring them down. My students know all of this and they hate me for it. And I like to do my warm-ups in those positions because what happens is your core is immediately engaged and it's becoming stronger, as well as you're learning how to sing and keep your core engaged the whole time, which is an inner posture, which helps with your projection, which helps keep you strong sort of throughout any kind of singing you have to do in any position that you are in. So if you lose your inner strength and your inner core strength, then you're messing with part of your singing mechanism. But you can be on the floor then, lying down. And if you know what it feels like to have that core strength, you can do that lying down. You could do it bent over something. You could do it leaning back a little bit, and you go playing around. And then if you're in a position on stage that's really uncomfortable, twisted and off to one side or something like that, then you have to ask the director if you could please change it. And what I tend to think about the entire time as I'm moving from one position to the next is, as long as I haven't dropped that sense again of my core being strong and keeping my body engaged throughout whatever angle I'm in, then I'm fine.
Okay. Now, Julian, setup number 2. So you asked for the right to reserve to amend anything. Would anything you would amend?
No, actually, it's really good to hear that. It's good advice. It's like, oh,
I think
good
so.
Reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I still do the planks. I was doing them last night before the show.
I watched it last night before watching you perform last night, and I looked at your posture, I looked how you moved. It is a great part of what singers do, but not everyone articulates it the way you just did. And frankly, the only other person I ever heard articulate it that well was Roberta Peters, which is also why I thought of you in context of her. I don't ask singers about their private lives. I'm just going to ask you a little bit. You grew up in New York. What borough?
In Manhattan. I grew up downtown, actually closer to here than where I am now, on 24th Street and 7th. So.
And at what point did you discover you had a voice, you had an interest in doing this as a career?
Oh, well, I never had an interest in doing this as a career, to be totally honest. And not that it was a dislike. Well, that's not true either. When I was young, my mother was the one that listened to opera all the time at home on the radio. It was on 24 hours a day. And I could not understand why she was listening to people yelling at each other in a foreign language. I just thought, there's something that's not right here. And I remember very vividly as a child just being like, oh, turn that off. Why are they yelling? You don't even know what they're saying. It's funny how the universe turns things around on you. I always knew I was going to be in the theater, though. I think even when I was really young, and I was quite shy, so I never would have said it out loud, but I always enjoyed being in the theater. I danced a lot. I started in ballet, and I was in the Nutcracker for 2 seasons at City Center when I was a child. So I enjoyed being in the theater, especially in those kinds of environments when you are really in a make-believe land. And then I kept doing those things, and and I sang when I was in grade school and so on and so forth. And when it came time to go to high school, I decided that I wanted to go to LaGuardia because it was an art school, and I got in for singing, and I went for singing, but I sang, instead of doing like a regular musical history class, I took a jazz course instead because I wanted to, and I was lazy, and I thought jazz is only like 100 years old, so let's do that instead of classical music. But it was also because my initial, my foundational love of music comes from listening to people like Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra and all of the Golden Ladies of Song and all of this kind of music and all of the movie musicals, the black and white and Technicolor movies. I've watched all of them ad nauseum on all of the old VHS tapes that we used to rent when I would go to the store with my parents on the weekend, and we would each rent a movie, right, that we all got a chance to watch. And that's what I did. I went through the catalog. I was in love with that, actually. I was in love with watching Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and Gene Kelly, and I still am. I have a huge, huge, huge part of my love for the movies, for arts in general, and for the singing, dancing, communicating of those kinds of things. That it all comes from that period of time. And then it just so happened that as I went through high school, I was doing a little bit of all of those things. I also sang with a jazz band. We went to The Hague actually after my senior year, and we sang at the North Sea Jazz Festival, which was really great. And I got to see all these amazing people that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so I had a lot of really interesting experiences. Obviously, I sang a lot of musical theater too when I was in high school. But I was also doing classical music. I sang a lot of GNS, Gilbert and Sullivan. I was actually in a couple Gilbert and Sullivan productions in New York because my friend's father ran the production company up when they used to perform at Symphony Space. So when I was a young teen, I had been in, I think it was Princess Ida or something. I was a page boy, playing boys. I was a boy in the Nutcracker too. I was mortified because I was 10 or something, and I just couldn't. I was a little girl. I wanted to wear the frilly dress, and they put me in a sailor outfit instead because I was tall. So anyway, I always say if somebody had told me then, listen, get used to it, I probably still would have been distraught. But so it just all kind of slowly evolved, and then eventually the singing really, it was the root of it for me was the singing. And that's why I decided to then audition for Juilliard, and I got into Juilliard, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get a classical education here, and then I'll still make up my mind as to what I want to do with it. And then once you're in it, you do your undergrad, and then I stayed for my master's, and then lo and behold, I started working. And then all of a sudden,
immediately, and that's part of the story that's interesting. But I want to ask you a question. My dad was a professional trombonist, and he loved all kinds of music. And so I was raised with Ella, and not so much Frank Sinatra, but with a lot of the others, and with Fred Astaire, for whom I was named. And we share a birthday, by the way. But I would have been named from anyway, but it happens we share a birthday. And my father always said to me that one of the best singers of all was Fred Astaire,
Really?
because he had a reedy voice. It wasn't that, but it was the way he approached the lyric and the way he factored in the rhythm of his feet. Even if he wasn't dancing, he had this rhythm in the way he sang that was very particular. And so I grew up thinking of Fred Astaire as a great singer, in addition to being a great
interesting.
dancer. Yeah.
I just thought that they were all wonderful, complete performers. To me, that was like the epitome of being a performer, was that they could do all of it. And it was seamless, one thing into the next. So you were never taken out of the story just because they started dancing or singing.
Yep.
I thought, well, that's great. That's what it should be, right? We're just telling a story, and we're going to burst into song because it feels good, right? Or whatever. So, yeah.
So I'm going to fast forward in your career to now, to last night. Comedy is a lot harder than tragedy, according to most people I know who work it. And there is a potential in opera, in theater, in film, everywhere, to overplay the comedic aspect, and then it often falls flat. What you do, what Roberta Peters did, what someone as distinct as Olga Borodina, who is she's a wonderful singer, but you and she would not be sort of paired in the same category, although you're both mezzos. But she plays every moment seriously. And one of the things that I really loved last night watching you was that you responded to everything that everybody was saying on the stage. You responded to every moment. If something dropped that was not supposed to drop, you were like a candle last night. You were responsive to everything. Did you learn that? Is this innate to you? Because it's very particular.
I don't know. Maybe it is somewhat innate because I don't really know. But I know that I've, when you know a role really well, right? It's like you don't really think about how to walk anymore. Well, generally speaking, right? Unless, of course, you have an injury or something. But for the most part, for the majority of our lives, if we are, healthy, able-bodied humans, we don't think about walking because we learned how to do it, and it comes second nature to us at this point. It's sort of like that when you know a role so well. It becomes second nature, so it frees your mind to think about other things. And it frees your mind to think about other things, to react to other things, to sometimes add things, subtract things, you can, it just gives you that space in your mind to do something else.
But needless to say, last night you responded as Rosina and not as Isabel.
Oh, well, yeah.
I want to make that very clear, because sometimes you see a performer, understandably, be thrown by something that happens on the stage. Or, not last night, but it happens that a conductor goes too fast, that the conductor and the singer are not in sync. And I'm going to ask you a question, not related to last night, but if you know this production of Il Barbiere di Siviglia, there's what's in French called a passerelle, where the singers walk forward onto it and the conductor is behind them. So you're not looking at the conductor when you're singing, if you're looking at the conductor at all. And when you're singing in front of the passerelle, in front of the orchestra, there is a tiny fraction of a second difference in which the singer's voice and the orchestral music comes forth, which is different from when you're behind the passerelle. And you and Lawrence Brownlee completely nailed it last night. Not everyone does.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm not being critical here, but it's a very hard thing to do because there is a fraction of a difference. And I was sitting in the grand tier last night. I was not in the orchestra, so I could see the passerelle and see the action and see the movement, see the candle fall in the orchestra pit and things like that. And it's very particular. So when you are singing and acting and moving on the passerelle and going back and forth and doing comedy, do you also hear and listen and make that accommodation for the slight fraction of a second difference, or it's just natural?
I guess we do it just automatically at this point, you know. The whole acoustic thing about being on stage is something that you learn over the years of doing it, and every theater feels a little bit different, you know, depending on the set as well. Sometimes you have a very giving, wonderful set to sing with, and sometimes you might as well be singing into a pillow, you know, depending on what the set looks like, or they have grass on the floor and dirt and cushions. It's like a singer's nightmare to put us in a padded room for a variety of reasons. But so yeah, that all kind of depends on the set. But generally speaking, right, the further away you are, the further upstage and away from the audience that you are, the more you're anticipating the conductor's beat in order for your sound to sort of match with the orchestra. And then on top of it, you're also dealing with whatever the conductor's doing, right? Because some conductors are their one is a one, and the orchestra's with them. And then sometimes they're one, and their orchestra's on the one here. Mm-hmm. And so you develop that understanding. And it sounds a lot more complicated, I think, than it is when you're actually in it. It just becomes sort of a part of the communication that we all have, right? And then when we get down to the passerelle, it's actually, I think, probably the easiest point, because we can really hear the orchestra now, finally. Because a lot of times, you know, the joke with singers is that you start singing on stage and you can't hear anything but yourself. And it's not great. It's not a like, oh, I sound great. No, it's like, can't hear anything. So it's really lovely, actually, to be so close to the orchestra, because you go, oh, I can hear and I can sing and I can do all of it at once, and it's good.
But is it, you're very professional, but is it a distraction to not see the conductor?
Not really.
Okay. No, very famously, those of you who are here, and this artist is in the theater now, so I can mention her by name, Violetta Urbano, who is a strong, capable, adaptable singer, was appearing in Verdi's Attila, the Met premiere, Riccardo Muti conducting, and Prada or somebody designing. It was like a Milanese production brought to New York. And it's a very hard role. I forget Dorabella, I forget Isabel. It's one of those Bella names. But she was very confident. She was fine. And I said to her here, I said, when you look at Maestro Muti, and she said, I don't look at Maestro Muti. Maestro Muti looks at me.
Yeah, she's right, though. I mean, honestly, this is a real thing. It's I would say that if you ever see me specifically looking at a conductor for longer than like a glance and back, it's because something's wrong, right? And it's not a blame game, but something's not quite right. And you're looking because something in your ear and something's off. Doesn't matter what it is, but something's off. So then that's what I would usually say. I'll look, you know, not oftentimes, every now and then you'll have a conductor that will be like, I need you to look at me, I need you to look at me. And we're like, why? Mm-hmm. That's not fun for the audience.
No, it's not.
We should just stand and do a concert then. Like, you know, the whole idea is that we can always see the conductor out of the corner of our eye. At least I try to. I can always, in some periphery, you know. And then I've joked before that I have had colleagues in the past who purposefully don't put their contacts in because they're going, it's fine, it's fine.
Julian, I'd like you to play number 2, and then right after that, set up number 3. Which are barbiere, Leonard.
Is that from like 2014 or something?
Yeah, it's an older one.
Oh, it's an old one. Is it dress rehearsal or something?
So Julian, set up number 3, please. I want to point out one thing about this character, and then I'm going to ask Isabel a question. This character we're going to meet in the next video as well, but you won't be playing her. Okay? You'll be playing someone who's in love with her. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
This was from probably about 10, how long ago? A number of years ago?
Well, we think this is 2014, right?
2014, so
Yeah.
relatively recently. Relatively. Relatively. But
Sure.
yeah. But because it's in a very established production by Bartlett Shear that the Met has done a lot, you've appeared in a fair amount, and other artists have too. Your performance, has it changed? Has your character changed? Has your approach to her changed? Has your voice changed? Has anything?
All of the above.
All of the above. Because what I want to point out is the really good artists do not put into amber and freeze their performance at the age of 21, and they do that for the rest of their careers. They evolve and they deepen their performances, and you have.
Wow. Yeah, I think the first or the best way to make yourself crazy and lose your mind is to try to put something into amber and do it again and again and again the same way, because you'll never be able to. So you actually sort of hurts you in the process, right? If you're always trying to fit the shoes that you wore in the previous time. And it's tricky because the business itself doesn't always feel like it is supports artists to change and evolve, right? When we see an artist that we like and we appreciate what they're doing, we like that they hold their own standard. But then we get also a little bit critiqueful or finicky when they start to change and do different things. And if it's not higher than the previous standard, it can only be lower, apparently. And that is, that's very difficult for artists. Very, very hard. We are our own worst critics at all times. And so sometimes, and I find that this is, I mean, the arts in general have a habit of this, but I do feel like the classical music world particularly, there is such an emphasis on what we consider to be perfection, especially in the world of opera, that I do actually think it's quite detrimental to the art itself. Because ultimately, if we are trying to have an art form that is the epitome of human expression in its grandeur, right, then it also has to have just as big of flaws, right? You cannot have a complete picture unless it is actually complete. It cannot be perfect. How can you, right? So anyway, that's kind of a tangent, but as far as she is concerned, she has changed, 9 years ago. That was a long time ago in life. I would say that I feel quite differently singing her now. My voice has changed. I mean, I've sung Carmen now, in the interim. I've just sung a lot in the last 9 years. And all of those things, you have to remember that like an athlete, right? It is about your muscles. And there is wear and tear, and it's not a negative thing to say, but it is a truth, right? We all age, we get tired, we are more tired as we are older, and all of these things play a factor into how you approach roles over and over and over again, and how you approach new roles, and so on and so forth. Some of the interpolations in that video I still do, some of them I don't, and I've changed them to other ones that I like better, or that feel more comfortable to me now in my body now, right? My body now is different than my body 9 years ago. And accepting that too as an artist is really important, because then you give yourself the freedom to be something else, right? And that's really important.
And basically what Rosina is saying in this aria beautifully and repetitively is, I can get along with you, but if you cross me, watch out. That's the story of that aria. But the way a singer interprets it musically, dramatically, gesturally, the way you are directed by whoever the director, producer is, makes for all of these different changes. I'm wondering, and I hadn't thought of this question before, but I'm going to ask it now. The way society talks about women and women's resourcefulness and the way women are treated 9 or 11 years ago when that was done is different from now. And Rosina, although the character is from about 1815, we evolve as society. I hope we get better as society. But I'm wondering whether, and I've never asked this of an artist before because I hadn't thought of the question before, does daily
have a lot of
life
thoughts.
in the, pardon me?
I was like, I'm going to have a lot of thoughts. Go on.
Oh, I'm glad. Daily life and the way the relations between men and women and the way women are perceived in society, the way they are advancing, but unfortunately in many ways that they are still kept down. How does that inform the performance of a role of a young woman who's caught the eye of an attractive guy and she doesn't know who he really is, but she likes him and he definitely likes her. And the whole thing is a comedy about how he abducts her from being protected by a ward, let's say, and they meet, there's confusion, then they fall in love and it ends happily. But the woman in this opera from about 200 years ago is different because her time is different, her circumstances are different, but you're playing her in 2025. You said you have a lot of thoughts.
I do. It's a really interesting discussion, and I'll see if I can be as concise as I can for now. But I have more thoughts now on it than I even did 9 years ago. That has evolved over time, just out of life experience and conversations with friends and cultural shifts and things like that. More of a, I hate some of those jargon that we use, like awakenings, but the word awakening is actually quite a good word because there are things I think that we inherently know all along, and sometimes something has to awaken your mind to go, oh, right. Oh, that's not quite right. Yeah. And this is one of those things. Like, opera is fraught with stories of women who are portrayed in the way that the men at the time designed them. And that's okay. That's what they were. I mean, art is full of that. You know, that's the whole point of art, right? It is a reflection of the society at the time. So I'm not particularly insulted by it. Some people choose to be insulted by it, but I'm not. But I choose to then do my best as an actress and as a singer to find my way in it in as authentic as a way possible to tell the story, because that's my job. This can be challenging, right? I know that the first time, and this happened, this was the very, very, very beginning of my career. I've had I'm not even sure if I could call it a love-hate relationship, more of a hate-hate relationship with Dorabella from Così, because I always found her to be, it's less to do with, in a way, this subject, but more to do just as a woman. I found her to be fickle. I didn't like the idea that she felt the way she did in the first place and that she could change her mind, and I didn't like the idea that they didn't know the boys had, you know, the whole concept of the opera was beyond my level of comprehension or desire of comprehension. But I diligently, every time I sang Dorabella, forced myself to put myself into her shoes, because I thought the only way this is going to be funny also is if she firmly believes that her love is off to war and she's never going to see him again, and we don't know what's going to happen to her because she's a woman of a time period that if she's not married, she won't have a life, right? Or she goes to the convent, and clearly she doesn't want to do that, right? So her options are few, and I think if my options were that few, which they're not, thankfully, but if they were, I think I would be in a state of desperation too. And I would very likely entertain the next exotic person that came up to me that showed me some sort of an interest that could potentially take care of me for the rest of my life, right? And that's really weird to say as a woman now, when I am not only, you know, an independent working female, but I've been a single mother, I've done it all myself, right? So, but I really choose to put myself into those shoes because I do think that the only way you can also make it funny is if the character firmly believes everything that they're saying, because then it's the audience's job to find the humor or the sort of uncomfortable humor in it, right? It's not my job to do that. I have to play her as she is. And so it goes in the same way for these types of characters, that you play them. For me, if I can play them in the time that they were written, which is helpful when you have a relatively period production, slightly ambiguous, but relatively period production, that it can work. You have to give it some grace. It is a production that was written when it was written, right? And if you are firmly against the message of the production, then don't do it, right? But other than that, do it and have fun with it, and then enjoy, as far as Barbara Seville is concerned, the wonderful comedy of it, the language, the play of the words. I mean, it's the whole thing is ridiculous, right? So I think then you can lean into the goofiness of the rest of it.
So I have to ask, you said when I sang Dorabella, is she in the past for you?
Oh yeah, she was retired a long time ago.
I'll tell you why. Because 3 weeks ago in this seat was Federico Lombardi, and I said, I want to see you and Isabel Leonard play those sisters.
I would maybe do that for her.
Yes.
It would be it'd have to be a very specific cast for me to do something like that.
That would be, to me, perfect casting, those two. And I'm going to just defend Così fan tutte. The story I can't defend. I understand what you're saying about the story completely. But when James Levine, who had been ill for a while, he had injuries and so on, when he was making his return to the Met after a long period of convalescence, the opera he chose to conduct was Così fan tutte. It's a long opera, so it's not that he was doing it to have a short night at the opera, but it was the music that he felt he most wanted to conduct. The music is spectacular.
Oh, the music is
in that
fantastic.
opera.
I mean, there's no question about it.
And I'm happy to go to a performance of Così fan tutte if you have sixth-grade singers just for the music and put aside the story, although I think that the story, it's not defensible, but it's still open to interpretation today. I cannot say this person's name because she hasn't announced it publicly yet, but a very famous singer is about to undertake stage direction, and the opera that she chose to direct is Così fan tutte because of the challenges it poses. She's a woman, of course, and therefore will be approaching it from that role. She, in the past, sang one of the three roles, and it's a very complex opera. And what I love about the opera is that whoever the director is has an important choice to make at the end. And I never ask the director what choice they've made. And if I go to a production, I don't want to know ahead of time who pairs off with whom. Do they not pair off with anyone? Do the two sisters walk away in a huff? And do the two guys walk away confused? Does one sister go with one of the men and the other not go with the other men? It has a different meaning every time I see Così fan tutte based on that decision. So that I'm willing to sit through 3 hours of gorgeous music just to see the conclusion, to see, aha, that's interesting, I've never thought of it that way. So we'll tell Federico Lombardi you're available. Because, I mean, you look like you could be sisters. And it's very seldom that you actually have that, where you have two women playing the roles where they look like they could actually be sisters. So we're going to go to the next selection, which you all figured out is Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro. And I picked a very early performance of yours as Cherubino because it's astonishing. I mean, I've seen every person sing this role. I could practically sing it myself if I could sing. We all know this aria very well. But what this marks you out for very early in your career is you sing the words with meaning. And just about every other mezzo-soprano I've ever watched or heard sing it almost does it by rote because she can do it, because it's charming, and Cherubino is an awkward, cute, sweet boy revealing his feelings. This is the only time that I can think of, except maybe Federico von Stade, who actually sings and means the words that he, the character, is singing. And this is early in your career. So that's what I find so impressive. And the character he is singing to is Rosina older. In other words, Rosina from the Barber of Seville got married. The guy turned out to be a jerk. And now she's not happy. And suddenly there's this younger guy who's paying attention to her. And she doesn't know what to do with her feelings. So, Julia, number 3, if you please. So when you watch that, you realize that this guy, this young man, the thoughts are coming to his head the moment that he says them. Nothing is rehearsed here. And it was a remarkable moment. I'm getting goosebumps. A remarkable moment because just about every other mezzo-soprano just sings it. And here was a case of a young guy, a teenager, opening his heart to this woman he clearly has a crush on, and she clearly feels it. And I can seldom, I mean, I've seen so many productions of The Marriage of Figaro. This is a rare example where you actually feel, I actually feel what they're singing about, and Sally Matthews as the Countess, what she's feeling as you sing it. Were you aware of that, or is this just now?
Well,
It was very special.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Cherubino has been a very interesting character to get to know, to fight with, to become friends with. I spent many, many, many years finding my my relationship with him. Honestly, like, there's some characters that are easier to play than others, and then some take some time to sort of, like, you gotta become friends with them in a way. because there are some parts of them that perhaps make you uncomfortable, or some parts of them that are too close to home, or some things that are just so far from home that you're not quite sure how to get there. So you find, you work with it. I find, I always say that being in the theater in general is, and can be so therapeutic, actually, because you learn so much about yourself if you're willing in the process, because you're forcing yourself to experience things that you might not experience otherwise, or to feel things that you don't even know how one could feel, and to be in situations, things like that. So Cherubino was definitely one of those characters that gave me a lot of interesting information, brought me out of my shell in many ways, and then eventually became like a nice suit that I could just put on and play with. And we did the Met production that we did in 2014 after this. I think this was like 2012 in Glyndebourne.
Yes.
Which is also, by the way, down in Baroque pitch.
Uh-huh. Explain what Baroque pitch is.
Well, it's just flat. It's no, I'm kidding. It's the Baroque instruments have natural fiber strings, and so they tune at a lower pitch than the metal strings in a contemporary orchestra. So 440 is our contemporary pitch, and then Baroque is lower than that. So it's really like a half tone lower, actually. So it can be quite jarring, especially after having sung Cherubino at that point already multiple times in our modern pitch, to then sing it down a half step. It felt so low, right? It felt so sort of, and it was then when I realized that had I been alive at the time that we were actually singing Mozart in Baroque pitch, I would most likely have not been singing those roles. I would have been singing the Countess and other things. So always interesting, right? But in any case, as far as Cherubino is concerned, he's a very, I found my peace with him eventually, and I love him dearly. And then I had a son. My son was probably 2 at the time that I did that one. And everybody always was like, "Oh, you must get all your stuff from your son." I was like, he wasn't old enough for me to get it from him. So I actually, and I've always said this later in life too, that I got a lot of my Cherubino-isms from the men that I was working with in every production that I was working with. And I never told them, but I would observe them all during rehearsals. And I would just watch, and like my Counts and my Figuros, they would be sitting, over wherever, whether we were rehearsing or they were just sitting, and I would watch them just like, just whatever. And so I would stand there and just go. I would just make it a game with myself that I would pick someone and I would just imitate them all day long. And that's what I did. So he's a conglomerate of a lot of really wonderful men, actually. And then a little bit of just me being goofy and realizing that it's not about him. It's not about a woman playing a man. It's about playing a person who is actually willing to have their heart on their sleeve, which most people are not willing to do. And so if you do that, his innocence, right, is really what's first and foremost and most interesting. It's not, oh, is this woman playing a credible enough looking boy? That's not really, to me, that became actually less important as I went along doing it,
So Julian, set up number 5. You, Isabel, very neatly handed me this next one.
Oh, you're welcome.
Because you were talking about awakening, and the aria is called Svegliatevi nel cuore, wake up, wake your heart up. And it's Handel, Giulio Cesare, so Baroque. And I hope we have time. There's a very long piece. I may play a couple of minutes from after by Vivaldi, just because I've never had a singer singing Vivaldi here before. And
that's a good piece, too.
And it's a good piece. It's 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and I want to talk to you.
Long.
But right now, Julian played Giulio Cesare. Svegliatevi nel cuore. And listen to how the sing is different. So Julian, setup number 6, we're only going to hear a couple of minutes of it, but I want us to hear some Vivaldi before we go to other languages and other things. How is singing Handel, which is Baroque, different from singing composers you sing a lot, such as Mozart, Rossini?
Well, the short answer is that technically they're not that difficult or different. They shouldn't be, but one should sing with one's voice no matter what one is singing. I mean, it's very similar in a way to Rossini, although the runs are very different. So Rossini runs, even Mozart has some runs in some of the concert arias, and then Handel. They're just different. They're like different patterns that you try to get your mechanism around. It's like learning how to do a hurdle versus a long jump versus something else, right? They're just different. They're different skills. Handel has its challenges because of the whole A section that repeats itself, which can really mess with your mind sometimes because you want so badly to sing the first thing, but now you're changing it and it's all the same words. And it's actually, if you know any strophic songs, right, where the melody stays the same but the words change, that is a challenge in and of itself. And then you get something like this where all the notes are different. So, and then in that particular case, I remember so clearly, I was sleep deprived because my son was probably 6 months old and I wasn't sleeping. And Emmanuelle Haim, who was our conductor, she had been writing our da capos for us, which was wonderful. But she's, and I say this with all the love in my heart, crazy, because she would write these insane da capos. And I say crazy in a fantastic way, like phenomenal da capos that I'm not even sure I could do now without crying. But we were getting them days before opening. I mean, it was one of those kinds of situations. So we were really under pressure in that production. But it was great. It was fun.
And it was a production where the whole time they're moving scenery behind you. While you're
Yeah, it was
singing.
very Night in the Museum or Night at the Museum kind of a production. I was, like I said, I was so sleep deprived that I just had to focus on what I was doing and get through it.
But I do want to point out something that I've said before, but it's worth noting that every performance we've looked at, Isabel's characters think, and it's just not a given. And you can see it reflected in her eyes and her face without the big gesture. But at the moment that she or he, the character, has a realization, sometimes a surprise to himself that he's having this thought, it's all reflected in his face. And it's, for me as an opera goer, it's a thrill because you don't see that very often, to be perfectly blunt about it. You see people who are very competent or very highly gifted singers who might be good actors in the acting sense, but it doesn't, you see her character think, not Isabel thinking, you see the character think. That's very special, it's very rare. So, you were a recipient of the Richard Tucker, is it award, honor, I don't know what the title is, that goes to the best young singers, and there's a gala, and I believe this example we have is the year that you were the honoree, or is it another year? Okay. And I just want to hear some Vivaldi because great Italian opera composer, but we just think of him for string quartets and a few other things, and his operas are under-discovered, and the opera is called Griselda, and you play the role of Costanza. So Julian, about 3 minutes after Audra McDonald introduces you. Okay.
Award winner Isabel Leonard reprises one of her most celebrated roles as the faithful young Costanza in Vivaldi's Griselda.
I hate to stop this, but you can find it online. Julian, I'm sorry. And Julian, set up number 10, please. It is gorgeous music. A number of years ago, as I said, Carnegie Hall every year does a thematic festival at a certain point in this year. And a number of years ago, they did the city of Venice. It was called La Serenissima, about the music of Venice, of which Vivaldi was an important part. And they hired me to do a lecture and a study of one of his operas, Giuditta Triumphant, which is no one has ever heard except that night at Carnegie Hall. And just immersing into Vivaldi and his role in opera it's amazing, and he's largely forgotten. So you sang this beautifully. He's more or less contemporary with Handel, but a whole other thing musically.
What am I supposed to say?
You told me you love the music. Of this,
I do, yeah. It's been a while, actually, since I had listened to that, a part of it at least. It actually, that piece, for some reason, really gets me emotionally, and I'm trying to actually physically, mentally recall why. It could just be because I really love the music and the words. I said recently in a conversation to somebody, I pick music because of the words, and I keep listening to it because of the music, which is very true for me. And if I don't like the words, I tend to struggle getting into the music. If it's really beautiful music, then I will, I'll give it a pass. But for me, like, the epitome of it is when the two things are, again, seamless friends of the same storytelling. And I think this is one of those pieces that is very much like that, the sort of aching and longing of the lines that she sings in this aria. They're really beautiful. They're beautiful too. And it's one of those pieces when you're standing on stage and you have the strings behind you and you hear that vroom, vroom, vroom. It really, it gets into you. Yeah. And it's so, it's very impactful.
It's heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isabel Leonard is, part of her family background is from Argentina. And you are a glorious singer in Spanish. And it's not always the first thing people know about you, unless they know that. And you have recorded a fair amount of music in the Spanish language. There was recently a program on PBS about Luigi Boccherini in Madrid and how he absorbed the style of music and the night music of Madrid and people strolling around. And there were people on the program from Peru and from Argentina, from Colombia, talking about, and Mexico, about how it's music of the Spanish language and that Spain and the Americas communicate and share styles and rhythms. And what you were doing before, talking about breathing, someone did on the program talking about dance and how dance is reflected in Spanish music and so on. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, I was a good sleeper as a baby. But on the few nights that I was not, my father had a recording by Victoria de Los Angeles of a lullaby in Spanish. And I won't say that I fall asleep when I listen to you sing it, but I really admire your performance. Julia, number 10, please. And set up number 12, please. When your son was a baby, did you sing him lullabies?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
my God. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I did. You know, ABC, that was a big one. The one that stood the test of time for many, many, many years, and I used to call him from wherever I was. It was a thing. I had a lot of nannies and family members who were like, "Can you do it again? Like, is he asleep? No, I'm going to work. I love you," but it was always very sweet. But the one that stood the test of time was actually Stay Awake from Mary Poppins.
And did you do this by telephone, by Zoom?
By every mode possible.
Because Christine Gerke, who was one of my first guests here, told me many years ago that when she was singing roles like Electra, and she had to sing her daughters to sleep, that they'd see mommy as Electra on Zoom and start screaming.
Yeah.
It's not like
Yeah, no, I've definitely, any form, shape. Sometimes I've had to leave videos. Sometimes he would ask me. He's, sadly, we've kind of grown out of it at this point. He's almost 15, but we held out for quite some time, actually. And it was sort of one of the, like, it was like a Pavlovian thing after a while. Like, he was like, I kind of need it now to go to sleep.
By the way, the music is by Xavier Bonsalvace, and it's Cinco Canciones Negros. And singing in Spanish, because would you call it your other native language? Or so is it different from singing in the other languages, in your operatic languages? This is a language of home?
It does. I think I have an innate sense of responsibility over it. Whether I need to feel that or not is debatable, but I think because of my mother and her family, I feel that it is important to do continuously, to, if I can, I should, kind of a thing. Linguistically, obviously, it's easier to understand, of course, but it also informed my whole foreign language education, right? It was easier for me to learn French when I was in school, and I also started that actually pretty young. So I love singing in French. It's one of my favorite languages to sing in. And then Italian, although I don't speak it, actually, I understand very well. And of course, I understand everything I'm singing, and the vocabulary is all practically identical at this point, So that was it was a huge positive thing that I had in my life that I didn't know how positive it was going to end up being for my career.
When I left working full-time in the Metropolitan Opera, my first job outside the Met was at the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires. And it was the most wonderful place because I left the Met on a February 6th. It was very cold in New York, and it was summer in Argentina. And it's a spectacular theater. You've been there.
Yeah.
It's really one of the greatest opera houses in the world. The audience is very particular. The pride that they take in everything they do in that theater is very particular. I know you've sung there. Talk about the Teatro Colón, 1908, by the way, May 25th, 1908, it opened.
Well, for me, being able to sing the concert that I did down there was, it was, I don't even actually really have the best words for it, but it meant so much to me because it came, call it relatively later, in the last, in the last 17 years or so of my career, it's closer to now than it was to the beginning. And my mother had flown down, obviously, with me to Argentina so we could see our family, and my son was there as well. And I have a very large family in Argentina, tons of cousins that I grew up with, seeing every year that were very close, and none of them had ever heard me sing live, ever. They might have seen videos and things, but they'd never been able to travel to come and see me sing. So there was like 20 of them, and that's not even the whole lot, but 20 of them flew to Buenos Aires because they don't live in Buenos Aires proper, and they all came to the concert, and my mother was there. My mother was born and raised in Buenos Aires, and so, the city is her flesh and blood, and so to have all of these people in this theater was very stressful, but wonderful all at the same time. And I did feel quite responsible for the music at that time.
So if I can ask, people watching this in the future, because it's being recorded, yesterday was the day that Pope Francis died, and he was from Argentina. How do Argentines feel about him as when he was a pastor and then a cardinal in Argentina, and then obviously when he went on to become Pope? Is he more Italian or more Argentine, or both?
I don't know if I can answer that, to be
Okay.
honest, yeah.
All right.
It's not something that I have many conversations with my family about. so.
Okay. So we're going to go on, excuse me, this is really quite a jump, but it's the next piece of music, Resurrection. I
Seemed quite,
I did not plan that, I assure you. But that's where we are.
well, maybe that's what we need, so.
If you saw the film with Bradley Cooper starring as Leonard Bernstein called Maestro, there's the famous scene in which he conducts the last section of Mahler's Symphony No. 2, the Resurrection Symphony. And I was watching the movie, and I knew Bernstein quite well, and I was focusing on, are they getting Lenny right, and so on. But then there was the moment where Bradley Cooper actually acts the conducting part. It was conducted by Yannick Nézet again for the recording. And I squinted a bit because it was in Ely Cathedral, I think, in the UK. And I said, I know that singer who, you know, would have been Jenny Turrell a long time ago. But I said, that's Isabel Leonard singing with Leonard Bernstein. And so we're going to play a bit of it, but what I want you all to know is this is not the part where the Urlich that the mezzo-soprano sings on her own. It's the ending. And what you need to know, because I just want to prepare you, the volume level of this goes from very soft to absolutely shattering, and you can imagine Bernstein perspiring and the arms going and so on. But it's very moving, and we're going to hear it, and then I want to ask you about the experience of making a film like this. So, if you please, Julia, number 12. So Julian, set up number 14, please. When I watched that, I was trying to imagine Bradley Cooper playing Leonard Bernstein, conducting the London Symphony Orchestra, handling Gustav Mahler, doing it in the cathedral where Bernstein did this performance, being the director of this at the same time that he was acting as Leonard Bernstein and trying to master Mahler, and getting everything right. And I said to myself one day when I talked to Isabel Leonard, I'm going to ask her from where she was standing, what was the whole thing like, the filmmaking of this, when all of this was happening at once, and so many things potentially could go wrong, but the final result, in my view, was quite wonderful. But what was it like being in the middle of all that?
Well, we filmed only for 3 days, that particular scene, and it's about 6 minutes, so 3 days for 6 minutes. And they were very long days. Filming days are very strange. You could come in at like 1 in the afternoon and not leave until 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, or, some sort of odd hours. And then there's a lot of, get ready, get to set, and then wait, and then, oh, we don't need you, go back to your trailer, come back. It's a lot of that kind of a thing. So a lot of that for a singer is tricky because are we singing? Are we not singing? So you sort of stay in a quasi state of warmed upness for the whole time. But we did it, and that was, it was actually quite great. But Bradley was, he was Lenny the whole time.
Oh, okay.
So he actually directed kind of as Lenny too, a little bit. It was really fun to watch. He would come talk to you, like, oh, it was really nice to see you. He'd talk kind of like he would be talking as Lenny, but then he would be looking through the cameras and he'd be moving around, and then, so on and so forth. And I think in the movie, actually, the take that's in the movie is actually one complete take. It's not actually cut up. They had one very long boom camera that was kind of swept in and out of the orchestra to start the scene. We had 1 day of a rehearsal. We were all kind of in plain clothes, and then the next 2 days of filming, we were in our costumes. And our costumes look very. It was really as close of a recreation to what was 1976 performance. Same groups of people too, right? Ely Cathedral, Westminster Choir, LSO. It was really amazing, and the acoustic. The best part is that the acoustic in the Ely Cathedral is like nothing I've ever heard in my life. And we finished the first rehearsal, and we all kind of went, as we just listened, and the organ as well, right? We listened to this just intense vibration that the cathedral held on to for seconds, right? Just kind of going, and we could not believe it. And then we kept doing it over and over and over again. And I don't think we ever got tired of it. And just when, you're starting something like that and you think, oh God, how are we going to do this again? But then you get to these points in that music and you're thought, no, this is where we should be.
Because Bradley Cooper was Lenny all the time, was he smoking constantly?
No, I don't think he had. I don't remember. I don't think he had one. Not in the cathedral.
Because unfortunately, Maestro Bernstein smoked constantly.
Yeah.
By the way, there's a very good play on through May 4th called Last Call. I don't know if you saw it.
I haven't seen it yet.
It closes on May 4th. It's by a guy named Peter Danish who wrote a true story of Bernstein and von Karajan having to be in the same room in the Hotel Zacher in Vienna, both within months before they died. And Peter Danish asked himself, well, what would they two talk about? I recommend it. Anyway, Bernstein did smoke constantly. And there's the true story, because I heard it from Marilyn Horne, of when Bernstein made the recording of West Side Story, and the original artist scheduled to sing Somewhere pulled out, and Horne was brought in, and they had already recorded the orchestral track. So Maestro Bernstein and Horne were in a booth together by a microphone, and he was conducting her as she was singing, and he was smoking and blowing smoke in Marilyn Horne's face. So when you hear her singing, "There's a Place for Us," imagine that she's inhaling cigarette smoke. True story.
That sounds terrible.
I know. But anyway, as it happens, I didn't plan on that. But speaking of Somewhere, 5 years ago this week, we were in the teeth of the pandemic, and you were part of the Met wonderful, logistically, unbelievably complicated gala that they did, everything virtual, in which you came from your apartment in New York, but Peter Mattei in Sweden and someone else in France and so on. And you sang somewhere that time, but I'm going to play a different performance that you did. You mentioned that at the beginnings of your career, you did a lot of Broadway theater and that type of music. And because I've emphasized the degree to which Isabel makes the words really speak and work, and you feel the language with her, even if you don't speak the Italian, the Spanish, the German, whatever, you feel it, the French. But I found this rather wonderful performance that you did pretty recently, and I just want to play it, and I want you to experience the artistry that we've explored tonight in a different kind of music. So Julie, number 14, if you please.
You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made, and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught. There's a place for us, somewhere a place for us, peace and quiet and open air wait for us somewhere. There's a time for us, someday a time for us, time together with time to spare, time to learn, time to care. Someday, somewhere, we'll find a new way of living. We'll find a way of forgiving somewhere.
Thank you. That's all I can say after
You're
that.
welcome. It's my pleasure.
I think this audience, the audience watching elsewhere, got to know you better and have a sense of how you do what you do. It's still a mystery to me.
It is to us as well sometimes, I
Okay.
have to tell you. There are
But-
days.
But I'm very grateful as someone who loves opera that we have people like you doing it.
Thank you. Me
Thank
too.
you. And I just want to say the last class of the series for this academic year is next week on April 29th. Corrado Rovadis, the music director of Opera Philadelphia, who is a big specialist in Donizetti, but not only, will be here, and I invite you to come to the auditorium and to tune in wherever you tune in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's great.